Schuster is the Vice President of Talent and Development at Comedy Central. She is the executive in charge of Lights Out with David Spade, and she has worked on many other shows. She is the author of Buy Yourself the Effing Lilies. What does that mean? Oh, this book is packed with genuine, real, down to earth, and hilarious just stories from her, but also a story of self-help and how to just love yourself more. How do we do that? Sounds easy, but not so much, is it, Tara?
You know, it's funny because my takeaway is if you break anything down into small pieces, like you can accomplish anything, which sounds so like lofty, but like I grew up in a neglected household where I was never taught to value myself or love myself. And if you would have told me when I was in my early 20s, like, you're going to write a self-care book, I would have been like, that doesn't seem likely. So it seemed really overwhelming to me. Like, oh my God, I need to take responsibility for my life. Like, how do you do that? Like, what are values? What are principles? What are vegetables? Like, I don't know anything. So I think like it can feel really overwhelming.
You were a scholar student. You decided early on that you wanted to go to Brown University and you achieved that goal. And then you went on and you were working and you were in the midst of your 20s and you were really successful, you know, as far as all that goes. But inside you were sort of breaking down and you had a lot of anxiety and you know, were self-medicating and doing all of these things, but you also were going to therapy.
Yeah.
So at what point did the Google document come into place where you started keeping a Google Doc of everything you could do to help yourself?
Yeah, so my book begins with sort of my rock bottom moment, which was the night of my 25th birthday when I drunk dialed my therapist, threatening to hurt myself, which is like a very particular kind of shame. Like, you do something like that once, you're not likely to do it again. But that morning was really the morning where I was like, I need to fucking get my life together, because if nobody's coming to the rescue, there's no parents who are going to show up, there's no wise mentor, there's nobody who's going to do this, so I have to do the work. And because I'd always been a good student and learning was sort of like my escape from my house, I thought, like, what if I made a curriculum of self-care? Like, what what if I approached this like a class? So that day was when I started the Google Doc, simply because I had used Google Docs for like so many of my school projects.
You were basically using the Google Doc everywhere you were successful. So why not this too, is kind of what your thinking was.
Why not approach this like a school project?
Right, exactly. And so in your book, you talk about gratitude journaling and the thank you notes. And I know these were coming from different places, but was the therapy involved in giving you all of these ideas? Like, did it go hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I point out is that I was not only in therapy, but also had a psychiatrist and was taking medication for anxiety and depression when I hit my rock bottom. So, like, with the help of all of that, I still managed to get myself there. But yes, it was incredibly important, and I highly, highly recommend therapy. It's like if you want to be building self-awareness, I don't know of a better tool than sitting and actually having to like say it out loud and have someone reflect back to you what the fuck you're actually talking about.
Right.
Is a hugely useful tool. So yeah, I don't know, like, my therapist wasn't suggesting, oh, you should write thank you cards, you should go running. Like, none of that came from my therapist. But like, if I didn't have her, I wouldn't have had the space. You know, I talk a lot about, at the time I took clonazepam, which is an anti-anxiety medication. And what that gave me was like the space to even see that I had a life worth living, you know? So I think therapy, in addition to the rituals, that's like what got me out of it. But I wouldn't have had the safety net, the space, had it not been for therapy.
Right. Okay. So it went hand in hand. And then you talk early in the book about the artist's way.
And so the morning pages are a tool for, basically, I call it DMing with your inner soul, like getting what really wants to be said inside of you out and onto the page. And yeah, they're really like a free flowing, what's on your mind. You don't need to put a grocery list. You don't need to do a to-do list. There's nobody else who's going to read it
I
ever. Like
totally.
they could just be garbage pages. Like I don't look back at mine really that often, unless I want to like try to find a pattern.
Right.
So yeah, there's no like, I think people get stressed out about how do I start journaling? Like that seems so hard. And the morning pages really free us because you don't need to journal. It don't need to be a story. It's not a narrative. It's just what you're thinking.
Right. At that moment.
Yeah.
And that, so, and your book is separated out in three different parts, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's the mind, body, and relationships. And number one thing within each area that people can start doing right now that could make the biggest impact before quarantine ends.
I'd say the first thing I'd start with is just being gentle with yourself. Like the whole, basically, I thought that by being mean and self-critical, that that was the way that I was gonna take care of myself. That was sort of the soundtrack to my life was just a diss track of "you suck," and so it took me having to. There's a great affirmation in Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way that says, "Treating myself like a precious object will make me stronger," and that was fucking like blew the lid off of things. I was like, oh wait, like treating myself nice is the way to get out of this, not being self-critical, mean, drinking, smoking, like all those things. So I'd say like, what is being gentle? What does being genuinely gentle mean for you? Like, does it mean taking baths every day? Does it mean taking a walk every day? Like, what's something that actually means self-care and is gentle? Because as we are more and more gentle with ourselves, we're more gentle with the world around us. Like, you don't meet super happy people who are also dicks to everybody. Like, that's not a thing. Like, they're just, the two don't work together. So I'd say like the first thing I'd say is like be gentle. And the second thing I'd say is if you didn't exercise before, now is a very good time to just walk outside. I mean, there are countless, like basically every self-help book or memoir has a part about how the person started walking or the person started taking an exercise class or, you know, the person started moving in the world. And I think there's a big temptation not to do that right now because we're weirdly busy with all these Zooms or we're, you know, a frontline worker who really is strapped for time.
Right.
But
Right.
to take even 10 minutes to walk in your body and kind of place yourself back and be present. I mean, if you can sweat for 20 minutes a day, it's like nature's Xanax. Like sweating 20 minutes a day will give you so much relief from your like swirling thoughts.
Right. 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 Absolutely. And about relationships, what would you say the number one thing is there?
Well, I think in this time, the number one thing I would suggest is strengthening the connections you have and reaching out to the people who've kind of been on your mind. There's a woman who I'm friends with who lives in DC, and I realized we have such crazy different schedules. I never really get to connect with her. I'd like to be closer with her. How do I do that? So I asked her for a Zoom. I'm like, this is the time that people have more free time, so why not connect? And I'd also say like anxiety and depression, they pull us out of our connection to everybody else. They make us feel alone and small, and we're never going to get out of this. So I think this is really the time to reach out and to connect more deeply with the people that you know and love.
Right. And the people who lift you, right? You talk a
Yeah.
lot about that in the book. Like, let go of the people who bring you down. It's the people who support you and who are with
Yeah.
you and can help you because you already bring yourself down. We kind
Yeah.
of do that naturally, right?
You do it enough. You don't need to do it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. You talk about and I love the first page where you say you let truth and vulnerability and kindness guide you. And I think that the book, you're just so vulnerable in the book, and it is like you just put it all out there. But did you ever worry that particularly your parents would be upset, come back at you in any way?
Oh yeah, that was a huge concern and worry. But I didn't want to be hurtful. Like I never, a big thing in writing the book was deciding that the only story I could tell was my own. That I had authority to tell my own story, but not to tell my parents' story, not to tell my sister's story, to tell my own story. And so I never tried to explain why they were the way they were. I never try to blame them. I never try to like connect the dots because that's not really for me.
Right.
But I have a relationship with my dad, and I really didn't want to hurt him. So I gave him the manuscript in a year in advance, and I said, if there's any change that you want to be made, I did the same with my sister and actually all of my friends who are mentioned in the book.
Right, right,
I gave them the manuscript because I didn't want anyone to be blindsided or
right,
to, I wanted these people in my life. I didn't want to give them a reason to walk away.
right.
And with my dad, I was really worried
Of
because
course.
you're publicly saying these things.
Right.
And his response was, he said, don't change a word. Like, this is what happens. I'm sorry. And
Had
it was the first time we had that connection, actually.
well, that's what I was going
Yeah.
to ask. I mean, had you talked to him? Had he come to therapy with you kind of before you even wrote the book? Or was
Not
this
really.
sort of the first time that he was really seeing everything in the raw?
I think the first time that he had seen it from my point of view, where he could imagine what it must have been like for me and for my sister. And so it was like the first time that we could ever have an honest conversation, because now these things were out there. Like it wasn't a mystery any longer. So it ended up being hugely validating. Like it ended
Right.
up being like, oh, I wasn't crazy. Things were as bad as I thought they were. Oh, okay.
I mean, that must have been such a huge weight lifted off your shoulder that, you could share this with him and he could be totally validating and supportive, right?
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
incredible.
it was shocking. I mean,
Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah,
Because the whole time I'm listening, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, isn't she scared? I'm scared for her.
yeah. No, my dad, in my thank you note to him at the end of the book, the greatest grace he gave me was he just validated what happened and said, yes, this is true. My mom, on the other hand, I don't have a relationship with, and that one I live in fear of. I used to live a lot more in fear of, but then again, like I said, I told my story. I didn't try to tell hers, and I don't blame either one of them for what happened.
Right.
So at the end of the day, that kindness is what makes me feel like comfortable with everything. Is like I didn't set out to
Right.
to
You were just taking care of yourself and making
exactly.
yourself whole and happy. And this was the journey. And you are helping so many people. I don't know if you know, but there are a lot of Facebook groups out there just on this kind of thing. And the whole aspect of having to reparent yourself. I mean, the whole idea of reparenting, like, did you even know about that before you set out on this journey?
No, and that was almost 10 years ago. So it wasn't like a term other than
Right.
later when I was like Googling it and we were doing copy editing of the book. We're like, oh, reparenting is a thing. And now it's a hashtag, which I follow. But I think it's like a natural inclination. Like I know in the 70s there was a movement towards like your inner child. I mean, it just makes sense. Like if you're not whole as a little kid, if you're not given a sense of unconditional love and protection, yeah, shit's gonna be fucked up going forward. Like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't it be? Wouldn't make any sense otherwise. So for me, the idea of nurturing that child just was like the most logical step for me. It was like the most logical thing I could think of.
It from the book, what is the one thing, there might be more because I know you have lots of rituals in the book, but is there, what are what's the thing you have to do every day, even when you have no time, but you know yourself that you still have to do that?
Make the bed. Easy. I gotta make the bed. If I don't make the bed, messy bed, messy head. I'm a mess all the rest of the day. I feel disoriented, confused, in a bad mood. I must make the bed. And that's been particularly true in quarantine. I'm like, society has not broken down to the level at which it's acceptable not to make the bed.
Interesting. Now, did you grow up like that? I mean, like, were you always told to make the bed? No.
Never. I was never told one time to make the bed, much less like it's a complete, I don't even remember why I started making my bed, like maybe somebody suggested it. I wish I could remember where that one came from. But if you want like a shortcut to make yourself 10% happier for the rest of your life, make the bed.
See, that's so interesting because my childhood experience was different. I always remember hearing like, make the bed, make the bed, make the bed. And so I don't tell my kids to make the bed. I hope and pray they'll make the bread, but I don't
Right.
want to tell them to because like I couldn't stand being told like, make the bed, make the bed. Like, who cares? No one's coming to see it.
Well, that's the whole point is like I came to it and it works for me. What I wish is that I had seen somebody else make a bed. I wish that I wish that it had been modeled, but if you're modeling for your kids that adults make beds, that's, instead of forcing it. So like all the rules, I just give it as this worked for me, try it on. There's nothing. That's why like I'm not a big Marie Kondo person. Shocker, hot take. Because I don't think there's any one way to do anything. And so I offer, here's a bunch of stuff. Here's how it went for me. And I offer this as something I hope is helpful to you, but I certainly don't claim to have the exact answer.
Tell about your thank you card recipe.
Yeah, so I grew up not writing thank you cards. So if you knew me between like 0 and 25, I most definitely never wrote you a thank you card, and I deeply apologize for that. But it just wasn't a thing. And taking a step back and feeling gratitude wasn't a thing. I got distracted by I love these comments. I'm glad it was relatable and helpful. And so when one of my best friends, Isabel, she wrote me amazing thank you cards when I was in my mid 20s in New York. And I basically was just like, I'm just going to copy what she does and I'm just going to see what happens. Like, because it felt so good when I got a thank you card, I was like, ooh, maybe I can like put that feeling out there. And so I kind of like came up with my own formula just because it was new and it was a habit and I wanted it to stick. So that's like why I created my recipe for thank you cards. But, in this pandemic, one thing I've been writing about this week is the need for gratitude is greater than ever. And I think, we think about it as being this super like selfless act. Like, I'm so altruistic, I'm writing a thank you card. But it's for yourself. Like a huge part of the benefit is that it feels good to acknowledge other people and how they've helped you. And it feels good to reframe like all the things I don't have to what I do have. And then the recipient gets to feel the of I'm acknowledged. And so thank you cards are just like the great feedback loop that keeps on giving.
So funny. I just read a comment from a friend of mine who's on here. Tammy wrote, Julie, did you get my thank you card? I didn't get yours, Tammy, but I'm so glad because it would make me feel guilty that I haven't sent you a thank you card. So it's so funny because opposite of you, Tara, I wrote thank you cards like it was my job when I was like probably from about 10 to 25. I wrote a thank you card if somebody smiled and said hi to me. I always did it. But as soon as I had kids and a family, I have thousands of thank you cards in the cupboard. And I'm like, why do I even have these? I should just toss them. But I think about like someday I'll get back to that. But I love the reminder from you because it is so
Yeah.
important and I love it. And honestly though, for the past 10 years, when people are like, I'm so sorry I didn't write you a thank you card or your kid a thank you card, I'm like, no, please don't. Because honestly,
Then
nowadays
I'll
I get
feel.
it makes me feel guilty that I didn't send one. Like,
I think maybe if I wrote another essay on thank you cards, I'd also just say like it's not that important. Like I have a whole recipe for how I do it, but if you just wrote like amazing to be with you, thank you, and in the mail or just a quick email, like like we've
it
got the
doesn't
time
mean
for
that.
that. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. Like your thank you card recipe, I totally connected with, and I would love for you to do a class like that for
Yeah.
teenagers because if I tell my own daughter about your recipe, it'll be deaf ears. But if a teacher tells her, right,
Yeah.
a book author who works for Comedy Central, she'll be listening. So we'll
You
have to do that another time.
have to talk to anybody about it.
Tara, it's been so great to talk with you. I have
Thank you
loved
for
our
having
time
me.
together. Yeah, and your book is really special. And I love the hard copy because as much as I love the Audible, like I need to go back and highlight and remember the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in like every single chapter and then go do it. And I have time, so I don't have an excuse now, right?
Yeah, I hope that the book right now in this weird time is a friend to people because I
It,
wrote it to be a friend. I wrote it to be present with you while you read it. So
right.
hopefully it's not a bummer. Hopefully it doesn't
No.
feel like reading. It feels like having a conversation.
Well, and I highly, highly recommend to anybody watching, listening, that you get the Audible because it's your voice, Tara, and it just draws you in. Like I just feel like I'm on a run with you, listening to you,
Oh,
and this brings the whole thing to life.
thank you,
But one
Lily.
more question I
Yeah.
have is there anything during this pandemic that you've started taking up that you didn't have time for before that you're doing now?
Yeah, I am going to run a 10K. I don't have an official race. I have a race against myself on May 25th. I've decided that's the 10K, and
Oh, wow.
and as you come from the book, like I didn't start off this way at all. Like I was the least likely person to work out that I knew. Um, but the Nike Running Club, it's like an app, Nike Running Club, has like a whole schedule. Like it'll custom make a schedule for you. So like today I had to run 2.5 miles. Yesterday 3. Tomorrow's a rest day. And then it's got a checklist, and I love a fucking checklist. So
Right.
just like as I do
Just
it,
do it. It tells you what to do, and you're done.
yeah.
That's
So my quarantine goal is the 10K.
okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good luck to you. I'm sure
Thank you.
you'll be great at it, and you'll win.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who
Thanks,
watched
Julie.
today.
Yes.
And
Thank you
if
for being here.
anybody has questions for Tara or is trying to find her book, you can go to taraschuster.com, or you can find me at Beyond the Book with Julie. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Julie. Bye, everybody. Thanks for being here.